In 1964, the Beatles were the biggest band in the world, but when they heard Chuck Berry was in the same hotel, they cancelled interviews, ignored screaming fans, and waited 6 hours outside his door. When Chuck finally opened it, he said 5 words that made John Lennon cry. Then he said 3 more words that changed everything. It was February 12, 1964, at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. The Beatles had just appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show 2 days earlier. 73 million Americans had watched them perform. 73 million. That was more than a third of the entire country. They'd conquered America in a single night, and now they were the most famous people on planet Earth. The plaza was under siege. Thousands of screaming fans surrounded the building. Police had to set up barricades. The Beatles couldn't leave their rooms without causing a riot. Every major magazine wanted an interview. Every TV show wanted them as guests. Every radio station wanted to talk to them. Their schedule was insane. Back-to-back interviews, photo shoots, meetings with record executives, calls with managers. But that morning, everything changed. Paul McCartney was in the hallway, heading to a scheduled interview with Life magazine, when he heard someone mention it. A hotel employee talking to security. "Yeah, Chuck Berry checked in last night. 9th floor, I think." Keeping a low profile, Paul stopped dead in his tracks. "Did you say Chuck Berry?" "Yeah, the rock and roll guy." "Why?" Paul didn't answer. He turned around and ran back to the suite, where John, George and Ringo were getting ready for the day. "Chuck Berry's in this hotel," Paul said, breathless. The room went silent. They all knew what that meant. Chuck Berry wasn't just another musician. Chuck Berry was the reason they became musicians. His songs, his guitar style, his attitude, everything about him had shaped the Beatles before they even called themselves the Beatles. "Which floor?" John asked. "9th," Paul said. "We have to see him," George said immediately. Their manager, Brian Epstein, who'd been reviewing the day's schedule, looked up. "Absolutely not. You have Life magazine in 20 minutes, then NBC, then cancel them," John said. "Excuse me?" "Cancel everything," Paul added. "We need to see Chuck Berry." Brian was incredulous. "You can't cancel Life magazine. Do you understand what that means? These are the most important interviews of your career. Every media outlet in America is begging for your time, and you want to cancel to chase down some." "Don't," John interrupted, his voice sharp. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Brian caught himself. He'd been about to say some old rocker or something dismissive, and he knew immediately that would have been a mistake. "Chuck Berry taught us everything we know," George said quietly. "Every song we write has Chuck in it. Every riff John plays came from Chuck. If he's 3 floors away, we have to at least try to meet him, even if he says no." Ringo added, "We have to try." Brian looked at the 4 of them. These were the 4 kids he'd discovered in a Liverpool basement, now the biggest stars in the world, and they were willing to throw away the most important media day of their lives to meet their hero. "Fine," Brian said. "But if he's not there or doesn't want to meet, you're doing every single interview I rescheduled." "Agreed, agreed," they said in unison. They found Chuck's room number through a combination of charm and bribery. A housekeeper who recognized them told them, "Room 937, Chuck Berry had checked in late last night, alone, and had requested not to be disturbed." The 4 Beatles stood outside room 937, suddenly nervous. These were guys who'd just performed for 73 million people without breaking a sweat. But standing outside this door, they were scared. "Who's knocking?" Paul asked. "You knock," John said. Why me? You're the diplomatic one. Paul took a breath and knocked. Nothing. They waited a minute. Knocked again. Still nothing. Maybe he's not there, Ringo suggested. Or maybe he doesn't want to be bothered, George said. We should respect that. But John wasn't ready to give up. He knocked again, louder this time. Mr. Berry, it's John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, the Beatles. We'd really love to talk to you if you have a moment. Silence. They stood there for another 5 minutes, unsure what to do. Finally, they sat down in the hallway, backs against the wall, facing Chuck's door. What are we doing? Ringo asked. Waiting, John said simply. For how long? As long as it takes. And that's what they did. The biggest band in the world sat in a hotel hallway, waiting for Chuck Berry to open his door. Hotel security found them after an hour. Gentlemen, you can't sit here. You're blocking the hallway. We're waiting for someone, Paul explained. I don't care if you're waiting for the Queen. You need to. The security guard stopped. Wait. Are you the Beatles? Yeah, George said. And we're not moving. The guard radioed his supervisor. Within minutes, the hotel manager arrived, flustered and confused. Mr. McCartney, Mr. Lennon. Gentlemen, please, you have guests and media waiting for you downstairs. Your manager is frantic. You can't just sit in the hallway. Watch us, John said. 2 hours passed. Then, 3. Brian Epstein came up, pleading. They refused to move. Media representatives came up, trying to coax them down. They stayed put. Fans somehow found out they were on the 9th floor, and the hallway started filling with screaming teenagers until security cleared everyone out except the Beatles. 4 hours, 5, 6. They talked quietly among themselves, nervous energy mixing with determination. They discussed their favorite Chuck Berry songs, argued about which guitar riff was the hardest to play, remembered the first time they'd each heard Johnny B. Good and how it had changed their lives. I was 13, John said. My aunt bought me the record. I played it so many times the grooves wore out. I had to buy 3 copies because I kept wearing them out. I stole mine from my brother, Paul admitted. He caught me. We got into a fight, and my dad had to break it up. Worth it. They laughed. These 4 kids from Liverpool, who'd become the most famous people alive, sitting on a hotel carpet, waiting for the man who'd made them want to play music in the first place. At around 5 p.m., 6 hours after they'd first knocked, they heard movement inside room 937, footsteps approaching the door. All 4 of them scrambled to their feet, suddenly looking like teenagers about to meet their idol, which, despite their fame, is exactly what they were. The door opened. Chuck Berry stood there in a t-shirt and jeans, looking at the 4 young men crowding his doorway. He was 37 years old, still handsome, but looking tired. He stared at them for a long moment. Can I help you? His voice was flat, not welcoming. Mr. Berry. John started, his voice actually shaking. We're the Beatles. We've been waiting out here because we just wanted to tell you. I know who you are, Chuck interrupted. You're the 4 British kids who've been playing my songs on every radio station in America. There was something in his tone, something sharp. The Beatles glanced at each other, uncertain. Yes, sir, Paul said. We've recorded several of your songs. Roll over Beethoven, rock and roll music. We're huge fans. Chuck looked at them, really looked at them, and then he said it. 5 words that cut through all the fame, all the success, all the celebration. Where's my money, boys? The hallway went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. John Lennon's face crumpled. Tears actually started running down his face. Paul looked at the floor. George froze. Ringo's mouth opened, but nothing came out. They'd never thought about it that way. They'd been so excited to honor their hero by covering his songs, they'd never considered the business side, the money, the royalties, whether Chuck was being fairly compensated for the music they were making careers out of. "Mr. Berry," John tried to speak, but his voice broke. "We never meant we thought." Chuck's stern expression held for about 5 more seconds. Then his face broke into a huge smile. "I'm kidding," he said. "Come on in." The relief was physical. All 4 of them nearly collapsed. John was laughing and crying at the same time. Paul put his hand over his heart like he'd just survived a heart attack. George just kept saying, "Oh my God," over and over. Ringo looked like he might faint. "That was mean," Paul said, but he was smiling. "Yeah, well," Chuck said, stepping back to let them in. "Now you know how it feels to think someone's taking advantage of you. Consider it a lesson. Now get in here before security arrests you for loitering." Chuck's hotel room was modest. Nothing fancy. A guitar case in the corner. Some scattered papers. A half-eaten room service meal. The 4 Beatles filed in, suddenly nervous again, like kids in the principal's office. Chuck shut the door and turned to look at them. "So, the Beatles. You boys really waited 6 hours outside my door?" "Yes, sir," George said. "Why?" "Because you're Chuck Berry," John said simply, wiping his eyes. "Because without you, none of us would be musicians. Every song we write, every note we play, it all comes from you." Chuck studied them. "You boys really mean that?" "Every word," Paul said. "We learned your songs before we could barely play our instruments. We worked out your guitar solos, note by note. You taught us that rock and roll could be poetry, that it could be art." Chuck was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured to the room. "Sit down. Let's talk." They sat. Chuck Berry and the Beatles, in a hotel room at the plaza, and they talked about music. For the next 7 hours, they discussed everything. Chuck told them stories about the early days of rock and roll, about racism in the music industry, about the struggle to get fair pay, about the theft of credit that black musicians faced constantly. The Beatles listened, horrified by things they'd never known, educated about a side of the business they'd been sheltered from. "When you boys play my songs," Chuck said, "I'm proud, I really am, because you're keeping the music alive. But here's what you need to understand. For every you, there's 10 others who took from us and never gave credit, never paid, never acknowledged where they learned it. We'll always credit you," John promised. "In every interview, every album note, everywhere, people will know." "I know you will," Chuck said. "I can tell you boys respect the music. That's why I let you in. That's why I stopped joking after I scared you." "You scared us good," Ringo admitted. "I think my heart stopped." They laughed. The tension had broken. Now they were just musicians talking to a musician. Chuck showed them some guitar techniques, taught them the real story behind Johnny B. Good, explained how he'd combined country, blues, and his own style to create something new. The Beatles soaked it all in like sponges. Around midnight, Chuck said something that the Beatles would quote for the rest of their lives. "Here's the thing about music," he said. "You don't own it. It doesn't belong to you. You're just borrowing it for a while, adding your piece, and then passing it on to the next person. The only way to really honor the music is to honor where it came from, give credit, pay respect, and then teach the next generation to do the same." "We will," Paul promised. "We'll make sure people know, and we'll pay it forward," John added. When young musicians come to us, we'll treat them the way you've treated us tonight. Chuck smiled. Then you boys really will be as great as everyone says you are. They stayed until almost 2 a.m. By the time they left, they weren't just fans anymore. They were brothers in music. Chuck walked them to the door, shook each of their hands. One more thing, Chuck said as they were leaving. That joke I made about the money? I wasn't completely kidding. Make sure you boys get paid fairly. Make sure your contracts are good, because if you don't protect yourself, the industry will eat you alive. We will, they promised. Good. Now get out of here before your manager has a heart attack. The Beatles left Chuck's room at 2 a.m., 6 hours late for every appointment they'd missed, and none of them cared. They'd just spent the evening with their hero, and he treated them not like fans, but like fellow musicians worthy of his time and wisdom. For the rest of their careers, the Beatles were different. They made it a point to credit their influences in every interview. When young musicians approached them, they were generous with their time. When black musicians weren't getting credit for their contributions to rock and roll, the Beatles spoke up. In 1972, Chuck Berry had a birthday concert. The Beatles sent a telegram that read, "Thank you for waiting 6 hours before opening the door. Those 6 hours taught us patience. The 7 hours inside taught us everything else. Happy birthday to the king of rock and roll." Chuck kept that telegram on his wall until the day he died. In later years, whenever someone asked the Beatles about their influences, they always started with the same name, Chuck Berry. Not just because he was first, but because he'd shown them what it meant to be generous, to educate, to pass it on. He scared the hell out of us with that money line, John Lennon said in a 1975 interview. And you know what? He should have. Because we were naive kids who didn't understand the business side. He taught us in 30 seconds what others couldn't teach us in years. Then he spent 7 hours teaching us everything else. That's what a real teacher does. The night at the Plaza Hotel wasn't just about 4 famous kids meeting their hero. It was about a master musician taking the time to educate the next generation. About respect flowing both ways. About understanding that music is bigger than any one person, and the only way to honor it is to honor everyone who came before. And it all started because 4 kids from Liverpool were willing to wait 6 hours outside a door, hoping their hero would let them in. If this story moved you, subscribe for more untold stories about the real moments that shaped music history. Share it with someone who needs to hear about respect, humility, and what we owe to those who built the road we walk on. Drop a comment about a time you met your hero, or a time someone you admired taught you something that changed your life. And hit that notification bell for more stories about the humanity behind the legends.